Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of MALN Opinion Plus, a new weekly series coming at you every Friday. This is a space for our opinions where we talk about current events and questions the Latino community are curious to know. Today, we are joined by Dr. Carlos E. Santiago, Commissioner of the Department of Higher Education. Commissioner Santiago was appointed in July 2015 and was named the chair of the State Higher Education Executive Officers Executive Committee. Welcome, Commissioner Santiago, and thank you for joining us today. We are very excited to have you as our first guest.
Gracias, Belén. It's a pleasure to be here.
Con mucho gusto. I'm excited for our conversation. So I'd like to start by talking about COVID-19's impact on students of color, which we're continually learning more about as the pandemic continues and communities are having these important, relevant discussions. According to Latinos for Education, Latinos are experiencing higher rates of infection, mortality, job loss, and barriers to accessing education. The organization listed mental health resources, access to basic resources, and long-term advocacy as crucial matters to supporting Latino students who represent over 22% of Massachusetts students. With these topics in mind, how has the department been able to aid college students of color during the pandemic?
Well, first off, we were clearly aware of COVID-19's impact on students, Latino students in particular, Latinx students and their college going rates. We saw early on that Latinx students were not completing the FAFSA form, and FAFSA is a federal financial aid form. You have to complete that form if you are to get federal financial aid, such as Pell Grants, or if you are going to get Massachusetts financial aid, such as Mass Grants. So we were very concerned when we saw those rates going down. Latinx students were simply not completing those forms at the rates they'd been doing in the past. And we were seeing also that, and that's a pretty good sense of whether they're going to be going to college, because if they're going to be going to college, the likelihood is that they're going to be requesting financial aid and they need to fill that form out. So, and we, began to investigate that a little more and found clearly the communities that were hit the hardest by COVID-19 are communities in our gateway cities, communities of Black and Brown students, and they were feeling the brunt of this. And they were also the communities that were being hit hardest by the economic downturn. Many of our students, particularly in the community colleges, you have 2/3 of Latinx and African-American students go to our community colleges. They all work. I mean, they work part-time, some of them full-time, some of them have multiple jobs. And we know that those jobs they were losing those jobs as the economy contracted. So if you add in the fact that COVID-19 was hitting their communities, the fact that they were not retaining the jobs that they had, and that they were not completing the forms to go to college, the financial aid forms to go to college, we expected the numbers to be down. And we are looking very carefully at this. We're working with elementary and secondary education because they're seeing the same thing among the same students at the high school level, college juniors and seniors that were planning to go to college. So all the signs were negative. And in fact, the enrollment rates for our community colleges in Massachusetts were down 13%. And for our state universities, we're down around 7%.
Okay, wow, that's very interesting and concerning. So you said you looked into this, or has your department been able to identify any reasons why? Is it stress from the pandemic, or?
I think it's a combination of a lot of things, and it's more it's affordability, it's their ability to afford college. But there are a lot of other things. I mean, we are seeing among our students and students in general in the Commonwealth, we're seeing more homeless students than we have before. We're seeing food insecurity as well. We are getting reports of increasing numbers of students that are in distress, mental distress, and under a lot of feeling a lot of difficulties. I mean, if you imagine these students that are so close to their families, and yet they don't want to be the ones bringing COVID-19 into the home. And I'm sure that going to college was probably not at the top of their list in terms of priorities. So we've seen the downturn. We have worked to ensure that more aid goes into financial aid. One of the things we did when the deadlines to fill those financial aid forms came, we extended it. We've extended it multiple times so that students can, if they are interested in going to college, they have the opportunity, and the deadlines itself don't hurt them as well. So this has been a really difficult time, both for students as well as our institutions. And I remind people, why is it that we are so focused on students of color in the Commonwealth, and particularly Latinx students? And the answer is that these are the fastest growing student populations we have. The Latinx population in particular is growing is the only one that's growing at significant rates. And the future of the Commonwealth, the economic future of this Commonwealth, rests on getting these students into higher education and successfully through higher education.
Absolutely. When I was preparing for this, I read that basically, Latinos especially, but also Black students have been on the rise. And now experts are fearing that these challenges are going to once again decrease college enrollment and graduation rates for them, as you were saying. And my question is if you see this as a short-term or long-term issue.
I wish I could say this is the short-term issue. My concern is that Latinx students have been least well served by education at all levels, from early education to elementary and secondary to higher education. They have not been well served, and they've not had the support structures that other students have in Massachusetts. So my real worry is that this is a long-term decline, that students will not just, if things get better, if there's a vaccine coming soon and we manage to deal with the realities of COVID-19, that students are still going to stay away, that they're going to be focused on different things. And I think we know, particularly for students that don't have other members of their family who've gone to college, who know what college is like, they may see this as a one and only opportunity. And we have to make sure that they can step out at some point, but we really need them to come back in greater numbers.
Right, exactly. And it sounds like, or we're going to talk about this more about some plans that your department has that will hopefully help out with this. Sure. So studies and communities, feedback across the nation have shown that the pandemic has heightened the digital divide for students of color due to a lack of access to technology and the internet, leaving them unable to attend class. Data compiled by the Brookings Institute has also found that absenteeism in the spring and fall have increased within cities with high populations of students of color, such as Boston, Baltimore, Hartford, and Los Angeles. My question is, do public higher education institutions within Massachusetts have the resources to ensure that all students have equal access to online classes?
Well, I wish they had more, but they have, and I'll focus on the community colleges. The community colleges made efforts in the spring when they went to entirely online learning. They gave students equipment so they could engage in online learning and remote learning, and we knew that technology limitations was going to be a challenge. So we feel good about what the institutions have done to help students. In some cases, for example, farther out west in Massachusetts, the connectivity is not as good as it is closer to Boston, and that's inhibited students from participating as well as they should. So there have been limitations, but I do have to acknowledge the community colleges have done an exceptional job. All of the students went immediately to remote learning. In the state universities, a good number went to remote learning, and others were kept in low density on the campus at residential institutions. And people say, well, why don't you just close all the residence halls? Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. Not all students have a place to go. And if they don't go to those college campuses, and we were not about to let students who had been homeless and staying in some of these residence halls to simply kick them out, as it were. So we've had to be, as one might expect, very sensitive about the needs of the students. We think that, I think particularly that the community colleges and the state universities have done a phenomenal job. It's interesting, when we thought that, COVID was going to be transmitted largely from students at the institutions to the broader community. But we're seeing that it seems to be the reverse. If you look at some of the campuses that have been most impacted, it's the COVID cases in the community that have spread onto the campuses. So testing has been very, very important for our institutions. Tracing has been important as well. But it's hard in a community college where students move between the campus and the community on a daily basis.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. Moving on to talk more generally about Massachusetts students of color, your office told us that the Department of Higher Education has an agenda predating the pandemic that is focused on equity and racial justice across the state's public higher education system. Could you expand on the ongoing agenda and which aspects of it is your department currently focused on?
Sure. Our board in December of 2018 voted to make equity, what we're referring to as the equity agenda, the highest priority of Massachusetts public higher education. And we did that because the data told us that the biggest gaps that we saw in terms of college going rates, in terms of retention rates, in terms of graduation rates, I could go and list all of the metrics that we looked at, were huge between largely a white student population and students of color. And the data basically indicated to us that that's where we needed, if we were going to make a dent, if we were really going to ensure an economic future for all residents of Massachusetts, Latinx students in particular had to go into college in higher numbers and succeed at higher numbers. So we have singularly focused all of our 24 institutions, in fact, our 29 institutions, have made that a really important priority. And it's a complex issue. It's more than just about affordability and giving students funding. And it really is a variety of things. It's about acknowledging the cultural wealth that these students bring to our institutions. One of the phrases I use, and I wasn't the originator of this phrase, is that we need to make sure that we move from a perspective of college-ready students, which is the way we look at it often. Is the student ready for college? Does the student have the background to succeed in college? To student-ready colleges, which means, are the colleges ready for the kinds of students that are coming to them in increasing numbers? And it's interesting. We have a number of Hispanic-serving colleges and universities in Massachusetts, and they are growing. And yet, you look at the faculty, and the faculty is largely white. Mm-hmm. And we see this in K through 12. Where you have, by the year, in another couple of years, Latino students are going to be nearing 20 to 25% of the high school, the student population. And yet the teacher corps in elementary and secondary education is only 8% teachers of color. So there is a disbalance, and we have to focus on these things. And we have to make sure that students have all the supports that they need. It's not just about tuition and fees. It's daycare or childcare. Do the students have those needs met? It's transportation. It's healthcare. Our universities' experiences and the students' experience at our institutions has changed a lot. And if we don't care for the whole student, for all aspects of the student, we're going to continue to leave many of them behind.
Mm-hmm. That's an amazing way to put it. Thank you so much for your time and for your in-depth explanations. I've had a great conversation.
Thank you. I did too.
So thank you again for talking with us, Dr. Santiago, and for being the first guest of MALN Opinion Plus. Everyone tune in next week for another episode. Follow us on Twitter at MA Latino News and Instagram at MA_Latino News. I'm Belen Dumont with MALN Opinion Plus. See you all next time.